Hello, this is Simon Brew. I'm the editor of Film Stories magazine, and a very warm welcome to a very special episode of the Film Stories podcast.
Come with me.
And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
And movies that had stories.
That the story just sucks them in.
This is just the beginning.
Stories. We would be honored if you would join us.
Hello, and a very warm welcome to Film Stories with Simon Brew. I am Simon Brew, as always. That's absolutely everything you need to know about me. The aim of the podcast, though, well, it's given away in the title. I'm here to talk of the stories of films, and I tend to talk about development stories, production stories, marketing stories, release stories, all those ingredients, really, that go towards making the films that we know and sometimes love. Just that, the films that we know and sometimes love. Now, this particular episode of the podcast is one of my occasional specials where I bring in a filmmaker to talk about their work or their latest release. You get a little bit of both with this one, as I'm delighted to have as a guest the British director Oliver Parker. Now, Parker, as we're going to be talking about, has just directed the film The Great Escaper, which is in UK cinemas on October the 6th, 2023, so the day this podcast is being released. It stars Michael Caine and Glenda Jackson, it being Glenda Jackson's final role before she passed earlier this year. Parker's other work, as we're going to talk about, well, the first film he directed was an adaptation of Othello, or you have to go all the way back to 1995 for that. Other films he's directed that we briefly touch on, one or two of these: An Ideal Husband, The Importance of Being Earnest, the St. Trinian's films, Johnny English Reborn, Dad's Army, Swimming with Men, and then, of course, this particular production. We also touch briefly on some of his early stage work and his collaborations with, of all people, Clive Barker as well. I think that's all you need to know going into this conversation, so I'm going to set it up with a clip from the trailer of The Great Escaper, and we'll go straight into the chat the other side of this.
Right, soon as we've had some grub, I'll take you for a spin along the front. And when we get back, I think they've got a male stripper for you.
What?
I made that last bit up.
I want to go to France.
What are you on about?
The trip to the beaches, D-Day. Really sorry, Bernie. You left it too late.
I couldn't leave you all on your own.
Unless you have to.
Where is he? He's disappeared off the face of the earth.
He's in France.
Bonjour.
At 90.
Well, he has done it before. Only then, of course, they were shooting at him.
So determined to honour his fallen comrade, the D-Day veteran made a break for the coast and mounted what has now been dubbed The Great Escape.
That then was a clip from The Great Escaper, and I'm delighted to be joined for this Film Stories podcast special by the man who directed it. Oliver Parker sat in front of an amazing picture as well, yes. If you don't mind me observing.
Not at all. It's a David Hockney. Well, it's a print, not a real one, I have to say. So
let's go with real one. That's fine.
Yeah, that's fine. Actually, David's just round the corner. David, come on. No,
I like your style. I like your style. It makes sense to start with The Great Escaper. And the basics I've got of this is that when the real life story of 89-year-old Bernie Jordan going on his pilgrimage to France really surfaced in 2014, Cathay, I think it was through Cameron McCracken, the producer, had the thought that it should be a film, engaged William Ivory to write a script, and then the call came into you. So that's the story I've got leading up to you, and I wonder if you can kind of take it from that point.
Yes, I would also add that Cameron's discovery of the story as a potential film idea coincided with Robert Bernstein of Ecos. So that's okay. They developed it. They decided to team up when they discovered they were both doing it.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and they thankfully brought on Billy Ivory, whose script was sent to me, and I have to confess I was slightly concerned that it might be a slightly cheesy, kind of obvious feel-good piece. You know, so sweet story, but is it just going to be a sort of twee British kind of comedy that, you know, they could be great, but I just felt I've done a couple of those and I wanted a little more ballast in the story. And when I read the script, I thought Billy had done an amazing job. He'd he'd almost subverted the idea, but certainly added many layers, and it was still being developed. So I got working with Billy, and we had a wonderful time. I found he was astonishingly kind of collaborative, but also just such a great touchstone for the values in the story. His voice for working class characters, for PTSD, for the war, these are areas he's wonderfully au fait with, and so it was. I found each iteration of the script was getting richer and richer, and then we got to the point where we had to cast and get on with it.
But you've said in the past that you quite like it when a script is almost when a script is unfinished. When you come in, that you can still have some degree of footprint over it.
Usually,
it sounds like you got a relatively finished script to start with, but then there was wiggle room that the two of you could collaborate.
Yes, I would say we shaped a fair bit of certain things, a bit like where we might put in what the flashback stories were.
Yes.
And where they appeared, what the climax was, developing the young care workers story with Rini. Because I wanted a kind of counterpart to Arthur. Arthur's was always on the money, perfect, but I thought there could be more shaping in counterpoint. So and he just absolutely picked up everything and ran with it, and then at a certain point we felt like we were completely in simultaneous vision. What's the word for that? But anyway, we were more than cahoots. We were completely allied in our vision.
So, I mean, this is what, 11 or 12 films as a director that have made it to the cinema screen. At what point with a script do you get any better at tuning the moment where you know it's okay to go?
I think so, but also a lot of it is scarily pragmatic in terms of when you can get cast, because sometimes I've got into projects where the script isn't ready, but this is the only window to make it, and we've got cast that want to jump through it. So can we run alongside, keep developing it while we're going into pre-production? There are all sorts of little challenges in a film scheduling, and so sometimes whether I think it's ready or not is not.
No, I hear you.
but yes, you do. You definitely get, and also what I hopefully have learned, though, or rather I've learned it. I don't always act on it, which is infuriating. Which is that unless you get it right in the script, you're not going to get it right in the edit.
See, I was just going to ask you about that, because I mean, you tell us a story there about a script not being ready at the point of going into pre-production. And I'm not asking what the project was. But from my part, we read this on our side of the fence quite a lot. And I just wonder what it's like being the human being in the midst of all of that. When your script isn't ready, you've got a hard start date, and your cast are presumably wanting to know where their pages are. I just wonder if you can just do you sleep or anything in situations? That just sounds really stressful, and just like
it is
not
stressful,
no fun.
It is stressful, but it depends on if you can see the rabbit, as it were. You know what you're chasing, and if you can see, if you've got a real kind of goal and an intention, actually that process can be extremely fertile, because
interesting.
There are some actors with whom the collaboration can be invaluable, and they'll bring an insight which you and the writer haven't yet come across. So, for example, I've been developing a project with Toby Jones, who's an old pal.
The peerless Toby Jones.
Oh my goodness. And so he comes into a meeting where we're still developing the script, and suddenly he's riffing on what the character is, and it's sublime. And he takes it to a place where we wouldn't have known where to go, and it adds another layer. So sometimes that's why I suppose when you're asking, the original question was whether I like to have a script that often isn't finished. There's enough room to allow all the other elements to arrive, because the script is only a part of the journey. There are so many other contributions to make, and some of them may be from the DP, the cinematographer. They might suddenly have a whole vision, or you might work with them to find one which changes how you would tell the story.
Yeah.
You know, if suddenly you're looking through a certain kind of lens, more, say, subjective, or you're using kind of more handheld or something, it will change. It can have a big influence on the script itself.
Yeah.
And then you get this bit where, of course, when you're working with actors, and it's the bit I really love, is you sometimes find the things you don't need to say. You know, so for example, Michael Caine on this film is remarkable at roughly going, I don't need to say that. I could do that. Look, watch me. And he'll do it with just a little eye movement. And you suddenly can feel what you're trying to communicate. And that's such an exciting thing. You know, with comedy, it's tricky because sometimes actually the words will carry a joke home.
Yeah.
But there are other times where it's funnier if it's unstated, or it's more dramatic if it's subtextual, you know. So it's really interesting and that's why it's always a challenge. That's why I can't ever get bored of it. And you can never get it right. You can just get it better sometimes and keep trying and hopefully learn from what you get wrong. But there are so many living ingredients that the script is a huge part, but it's not the only part.
I read a story of Denzel Washington. I think it was Edward Zwick who was directing him, just crossing out an entire page of dialogue and just saying, I can act that.
Brilliant.
It's it's just terrifying. Can I take, because your background originally is theatre, the Dog Theatre Company is what I found, which is a great name for a theatre company. But does that inherently, with your acting background as well, make you comfortable with actors? Because I look at the things that you've done, and nothing to me seems more terrifying than stepping onto a set of Othello in 94 you would have been making that, I would have thought, with the caliber of actors you had, and with the money you were spending and never having directed a film. And I just wonder, once you've done that, and once you've worked with actors and you've got that acting background to back it up, does a little bit that fear factor go away?
It does. I mean, you're right. It was very much in the deep end.
Yeah.
And, you know, in some ways I wasn't ready for that, but at the same time, you're never ready.
Yeah. It didn't turn out too bad, did it? I mean,
not too bad. But also the fun thing is, as a director, there is so much to learn all the time, because in some ways you know less than almost anybody on set, because the focus puller knows absolutely everything to the nth degree, or the costume or the make. All these people are absolute experts, and you're not an expert. You're just dealing with their talents, trying to bring the best out of them, which is a very satisfying thing. And actually, you're right. For me, you come in with weaknesses and strength, and I suppose strength for me was in performance.
Yeah.
And I played Iago, so I knew the thing inside. I'd done the adaptation. So where I was definitely lacking, which was I didn't have enough technical expertise at that point in certain ways. I did know a lot about what I was trying to communicate, and it had a particular vision. So it's, you know, you win some, you lose some. And I think having done that, you feel, yes, that the actual exchange with actors on the set, it's always a little bit nervous making, because actors are very different characters. You get some who are a little more nervous and would need more help, and there isn't time to do it, and they feel the pressure too. So it's sometimes the most valuable thing in my acting background is that I can act calm, even though we're all terrified.
Interesting.
Interesting. Because that is the thing. For me, it's all about gaining the trust of actors to be able to feel they could go there. You know, that they can they can relax enough. You know, sometimes there are some directors who can whip their actors into a kind of frenzy and get a strong performance out of their fear or anger or whatever. My take on that is normally really want them to feel safe and to try things out, and for them to feel they've got to the point where they've expressed their thing, you know, and to make sure there's enough time that we all feel we've had a chance to get close to what's the essence of a scene or the character. And that's a real pleasure. But whether it's Fishburne in that one, or Branagh, or whether you're working with Glenda Jackson, there's a similarity in terms of you're suddenly faced with a kind of legend, but actually these are wonderful actors who are wrestling with something. And if you can prove to them early on that you're not wrestling against them, you're trying to help them find the thing, or at least sometimes literally get out of the way. You know, some actors
yeah.
have such a powerful sense of what they want to do, that the best thing is to duck because it's going to come flying at the lens. I mean, you know, nearly always it's a collaboration, but the thing is to keep on your toes and react to the individual and in time. I mean, there are certainly some performances that I haven't steered as well as I might have done, and not knowing enough about how to do it, and the adversities of time and pressure make it difficult. And there are other moments where it's lovely, and one feels blessed, honestly blessed, to be part of a moment where something has happened. I suppose it's magic. You're looking for magic, you know, because most of it is pedestrian. To get a film is a lot of hard work, and some of it is very, very clinical, and you've got to cover all the shots. You've got to make sure all the lines are covered, unless certain directors are not going for that at all, and that's brilliant, and that's their vision of it. But usually you've got to cover the bases if you're going to have all the options in the cutting room. And then the thing around that, which is what I feel increasingly, in a way, you were talking about what have you kind of learned earlier.
Yeah.
It is this thing of how do you create the atmosphere for something magical to happen. You can't actually make magic happen, I don't think, but you can prepare for it. You know, you can try. And for me, a lot of that is about surprise and trust and relaxed atmosphere, that you can suddenly something happens and you go, wow, that, and you can feel it. I can feel it on bumps. And I've seen some performers do something. Glenda did this a couple of times for me in the last film, where it was like, wow, I wasn't expecting that, and it was so raw and authentic. It was quite shocking, and so you almost can't get it again. You just do another take, but it's like, wow, that's somehow one's got to you captured it. You've got to put it in the right soil now, and hopefully can build a scene around it. You know,
I've never heard quite the answer that I've heard directors talk about taking acting classes, for instance, so they understand actors. I've never heard a director say knowing acting's useful to act calm. That part of your day-to-day work on the set is to put across a projection of how you're actually feeling inside.
Yes, I mean
that's really interesting.
You are calm.
Yes, I can't. I mean, don't get me wrong. I can't imagine you smashing plates on the set of Dad's Army or something like that. But if you've got the footage, feel free to send it. Can I ask a casting question? Because yes. I mean, you. The cliche is the hardest films to cast are the ones where you've got young performers. So you cast a St. Trinian's film, for instance, you're looking for a 10, 11-year-old needle in the haystacks there. Yeah. But it strikes me the number of performers who in their 80s and 90s who can carry out the two lead roles you've got in The Great Escaper is probably a lot narrower for a whole bunch of reasons, some obvious, some less so, than looking for a 10, 11-year-old to take the lead in a St. Trinian's film. I'm just wondering, because I read in the press notes that Michael Caine and Glenda Jackson were the first choices and came to it fairly quickly. But what were your options had they said no? What was, I mean, presumably that was a possibility given that Michael Caine had retired.
Absolutely. Well, actually, we nearly went 2 years earlier, but had to stop because of Michael's health, which he then recovered from, fortunately. But the options were, I think it was 3. Because
it's terrifying.
Not just whether they can do it. I think the field is wider. There are some wonderful older actors, not many, but there are. But there's only 3 probably who could get the movie funded. So it's
the same criteria even at that age. Still somewhat.
I mean, it depends on how you're doing it. If you were to do it as we were always aiming for as it were, a big screen experience. You could do a little film, and there are 1 or 2 wonderful actors who I would love to have done that with, actually. Yeah. But given the ambition of this and that it was Pathé producing it, for them it would only work if it was probably 1 of 3.
Yeah.
And there was just Michael himself was just so right in so many ways. The soldier of him, the kind of charisma, the mischief, all these things. So it was like, when it went out to him, this is when one's most nervous, because if he had said no, you've only got 2 more strikes. and then could they match up to what one was hoping for through Michael?
I mean, my dad's in his 80s, and he said if he was doing it, he'd need lots of toilet breaks and 3 naps just for the sheer stamina of making the film. And also, we've just heard Ken Loach has just made his final film in his mid 80s, and I'm talking about this from a practical sense. In his mid 80s, and the sheer stamina required just to get through even a relatively brief shoot. And by the sounds of it, your 2 performers here, I mean, I know it sounds a slightly sycophantic question, but there's no other way to put it. Did you proud on this one? It sounds
amazing. And also, you know, a lot of things had to be taken into account where we're filming, you know, how many steps there are. There are so many things that you have to work out, but also there was an extraordinary moment with Glenda because of the schedule. She had to shoot all her stuff out in about 10 days.
Yeah.
So very fast. And she's nearly all in one location apart from when she goes to the seafront.
Yeah.
But that meant she had big scene after big scene, really, really kind of stuff, you know. And there was this moment, I've written about this actually now, but where we got to the end of the first week and the crew, who were, many of them were a quarter of her age, were mesmerized by this old dear, you know, from their point of view. They didn't know, a lot of them didn't know who she was, you know, because of her absence through her politics. Everyone knew Michael, but a lot of them didn't know Glenda. And there she was, you know, she's quite shrunken by the end and sort of, you know, gaps in her tooth and a bit cataracty. But boy, the passion.
Yeah.
The force in her personality was astonishing. And so we got to this thing at the end of the first week where I said cut on the last shot of that day, and the crew burst into applause. And I don't know if I can say this on your podcast, but
you go for it. Yeah.
Basically, she looked up, you know, through her kind of her eyes, hooded eyes, and said, I don't be so fucking patronizing. Yeah. Like that, right? and it was just superb. I did say, I don't think they are patronizing. I think they actually mean it, because it's amazing what you've done. She went, oh, sorry, darling, sorry. You know? But
I think there's one point you've got a newspaper in shot, and one of the headlines in it is, why do female stars swear so much? And you just have the most glorious bit of cussing right in front of that.
That's right.
I think that's well worth
spotted. Well spotted.
Well, because you were referring there to a tribute you wrote to her, which I think appeared in The Guardian, and there was one little phrase in there, and I love finding these little phrases that tell an enormous story in just a few words. And you talked about Glenda Jackson and getting through the trial of fraudulence was your phrase. What a delicious phrase that is. But presumably that's a little bit of an example of that working with her wasn't about flattery. It had to be about, she had to believe it was substance.
Oh, she could smell it, you know, and it is that thing where, and I did have this thing early on where right at the beginning, because you realize she was quite nervous to start with. And of course she would be, because at that age, you must be fearful of whether your various facilities are slightly slipping. I might get all the lines or whatever it is. But and also she confided later that she didn't always like acting on screen. It was like
interesting.
It was quite she loved the idea of it, but that she felt the pressure, and then she enjoyed it in retrospect. But the thing itself was pretty intense and a lot of pressure. And so she would be kind of have her armor on, you know, and early on, I was discussing one note where I thought she could slightly shift the emphasis of the idea. And I said this note, and she just looked slightly grumpily at me. And I said, well, all I'm saying is it could be a bit like this. Do you see what I mean? And she said, well, I see what you mean, but I don't agree with it. Like that. Which I love. And then we got into it more and more, and she began to realize, in whatever other respects of maybe fraudulence in my career, this bit I sort of knew what I was talking about. So she felt like we could work together. And after that, she was just amazing and such a trooper, and would just go for things. She just leap into scenes with full throttle. It was an astonishing thing to witness.
I've concluded, going through your film career, that you make films for parents. Not always for children, not always for family, but you certainly make them for parents, because the running times of your films are just delicious. Your longest film was your first film. Yeah. And even this is what 96, 97 minutes. And I mean, it's a serious point to me that lots of people lose this in the edit room. And I bring it up because you mentioned right near the start there about you get the writing right, you get the editing right. It sounds a weird question, but how important is a running time to you? Is that deliberate, or is that just by nature of how the cards have fallen?
Well, it's fairly deliberate.
Yeah.
Some of my favorite movies, the Casablancas or whatever, they're rarely over 100 minutes, these things, and usually 86. I mean, some of the great movies are like, whoa, and the speed at which they take them on. I love that. There are certain things, I was just thinking as you said that, if I did Othello again, I would...
You get it down to an hour or something.
No, I think I would take a little bit more off, only because I didn't quite have the confidence perhaps of the storytelling. So didn't
you take some backlash just for taking it down to 2 hours?
I did.
Are you a masochist? It's just like...
Well, I was just looking that's interesting. Othello really came to me when I was on stage. I think it was Milford Haven in Wales.
Yeah.
And it was 10:30 bloody matinee performance, 500 kids. And the play was 4 hours long. Our production was 4 hours long. And playing Iago, I never left the stage. So I watched the audience all the time. So you'd have the interval and they'd come back and suddenly it was like it was raining, but you realize they're all eating crisps.
Yeah.
And it's like, and then when it comes to it is the cause, whatever, they're looking at their books.
Yeah.
And so I literally was, how the hell do I get these kids to look up?
Interesting.
That's really what kind of motivated me. And I was going to go and do another production on stage because I wasn't directing that. I was going to do one in a fringe theatre, and I'd cut the thing up already because I thought this is a thriller. I really want to cut through to this younger audience at this stage. You're right, adults are a part of it, the parents, but also it was about getting the attention of young people. And because it felt like it was seen as a dusty old piece. And for me, and having had the pleasure of being in how many performances all the time, I was so transported by it. I wanted to somehow transport that to a younger minds and see that it's got relevance. And similar for the Oscar Wildes, because that came afterwards. That was, again, I'd done one of them on stage. And there it was nearly all to usually... whatever. Now I'm one of them. If I had the hair, there'd be grey hair. You know, it's sitting there and listening to this production and wanting it to be absolutely safe. And you know, you start a sentence low, and then as you proceed through the sentence, you get a little bit quicker and a little bit higher. And by the end, everybody laughs. And it's like, what's he actually saying here? And so I became fascinated by trying to do this thing of really getting an audience to listen afresh. And so part of that is, the same thing of wanting to bring an audience in and not overstaying your welcome. And I think it's a bit to do with, for the Dog Company days, where we did everything. Yeah. Posters, designing things, writing, directing. We did all of it with the amazing Clive Barker.
I'm on my list of questions.
Amazing guy. I mean, in a way, I've nearly always tried to return to the structure that we had there of real kind of passionate friends working on something which we all believed in, and we all did everything. And so I absolutely loved that, the commitment to the kind of collegiate endeavor. And that is a lot to do with also, he was always a populist, Clive. He always reached out to an audience, and in some ways that's my flaw. Someone was talking about the other day, well, you're not an auteur. And I said, no, I guess I'm not actually an auteur, because I'm almost more like an actor. I go into each project like it's a different world, and I really like mixing it up. But it's the world. It's not me, if you know what I mean. It literally is, wouldn't it be interesting to do something which is a broad comedy here? And how do we find the best people to do that and have an adventure together? It's almost like I don't have a style. I don't stamp a style on it because I don't really have one.
There's a loose line at the end of an interview with you. Sorry to talk, but just relevant to this.
You're well researched.
About at one point you were considering doing a musical of Hellraiser.
Oh, yeah.
With Clive Barker. See, the grin on your face might not come across. I mean, for a start, I want to see the poster that says "From the director of Dad's Army" above the Hellraiser musical. But I mean, to be clear, we are talking, for anyone listening, about the Clive Barker. You were in Hellraiser, you were in Nightbreed, and you were working with him at the theatre company as well. How close did that help? I mean, that sounds insane.
It was amazing. I mean, it came very close. I was developing Hellraiser at the same time as I was developing Othello.
Of course you were.
Othello went first, and so that disappeared, and then. But Clive is, I genuinely think the man's a genius, and I use it about anybody else actually I've ever worked with. I've worked with some amazing people, but he has torrential imagination. It pours.
What a lovely phrase.
And it's really he's unstoppable, and he's this extraordinary kind of Blakean artist. It sees everything. So it's whether it's his drawings or his writings or poetry, plays, whatever, incredible novels. He creates worlds. He's a myth maker.
Yeah.
And I suppose I was brought up in that environment, and it was an astonishing kind of education, but also innovation more. And we've once or twice tried to work together, and even more recently, it hasn't worked out yet, but we will keep trying.
I look forward to this musical with Michael Caine. I want Michael Caine.
It wasn't really musical. It was just a straight horror play. I felt like the stage had given in to, the cinema was getting all the close-ups, but actually, stage, you can terrify people.
Well, Monster Calls on stage is like, great example. My time is nearly up, so can I just quickly get this in before I'm evacuated? You've got you started your own production company, Anyway Content. Is the name of it, I think. And I just wonder, is that part and parcel of... There was an era where we were getting a film off you every 12, 18 months, and finding the money to get things moving seemed to be a little bit more straightforward. Is that you kind of seizing the initiative there? Is that part of the thrust of that?
I've been interviewed by somebody who's done so much research into what I've done. It's incredible stuff. Yes, it is really, because the 2000 and, well, let's say after Johnny English Reborn. It was very hard getting films made. After The Crash, it was hard. Before, I was working with a partner, Barnaby Thompson, producer, who now directs, who's a very good friend, and he was brilliant at getting the shows up and running. And we could plan them. Then it became so difficult to raise any budgets of any size. I spent a long time developing quite a big project, and it collapsed sort of last minute. And it left me a bit bereft because I'd literally into it. So suddenly, and I began to realize how hard it was, and you get cold quite quickly in this business if you're not moving on to the next thing, unless you've got a wonderful kind of seamless track record. And I would say mine is checkered. And so I could see it was quite difficult to piece things together, and then became quite difficult also to have any say on it. So I would try and in the years I may have to make more stuff, get a few that I really want to get made, done, and otherwise there's a danger you become a gun for hire, which in a way slightly what happened with this film, but not entirely, because working with Billy made it a very collaborative experience. But to be able to, I've got a lot of stories I want to tell, and there's an opportunity to tell them, I think, if I can create the right atmosphere and the right collaborators. And that's what hopefully this company will facilitate.
I look forward to those stories, and I hope we get to chat again in the future. This has been really fascinating. Oliver Parker, thank you very much, and congratulations on your film.
Oh, thank you. What a pleasure for me.
Thank you. And that brings to the end my conversation with director Oliver Parker ahead of the release of his new film, The Great Escaper, which is playing in UK cinemas now. It also brings to the end this special episode of Film Stories. If I've not bored you completely, you can find more from me on Twitter at Simon Brew. You can find more from the entire Film Stories project at Film Stories. We're at youtube.com/Film Stories, and we're on Facebook, facebook.com/Film Stories Online. Our website is filmstories.co.uk, which is updated very, very, very regularly with news, reviews, features and such like. And if you go to store.filmstories.co.uk, that's when you'll find all of our print magazines for sale email as well. If you like this magazine, listen to me. If you like this podcast even, please do consider subscribing to it and leaving ideally a hugely positive review. If you want to support us financially and support the podcast, that's at patreon.com/SimonBrew. But I think I've waffled on far too much already. I'm going to go away and prepare your regular weekly episode of the Film Stories podcast. Until then, you all take care. Thank you so much for listening. I'll be back soon with another bunch of film stories. Bye-bye.